used to be a bit like, oh God, I've got to go, like when I started collecting Trevor Horn stuff, like, oh God, I've got to go and buy some dollar.
Hi everyone, it's James here. Welcome to another video, and you'll see on the screen here today I've been joined by a special guest. This is my old friend Jamie.
Hello.
Hi Jamie. And we're here to talk about Trevor Horn today, and we're going to be looking at the great man's life and career and work. So just before we start, I'll just throw this one to you, Jamie. Would you say that of all the people that you love in music, would you say that Trevor Horn is the one kind of defining favourite figure for you in kind of pop music?
Yeah, it's kind of one of these figures where I've kind of started to kind of make links with all the music that I love. It's like, oh, right, Trevor Horn worked with Paul McCartney. Well, I like the Beatles. And, Trevor Horn, worked with this person and worked with that. So, yeah, everything for me kind of goes back to kind of Trevor Horn and how it links into everything else now. It's kind of, molded into everything else. I mean, I do like other music as well, but Trevor Horn has been like such a major figure in my kind of love of music, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get to this as we get further into the video, but I know that you've met Trevor, you've interviewed him, and you've seen him live a couple of times. So we'll get to that at the end of the video. We can talk about that. I mean, there's lots to talk about. There's no way that we're going to be able to cover everything. But if we kind of just go back and just quickly talk about how we first encountered him, I would imagine that we're going to have a fairly similar story. I mean, we're both quite similar ages. I mean, I think you're a bit older than me, but my first memory of seeing Trevor Horn was on Saturday morning TV. It would have been something like Swap Shop or Tiz Was or something, and it was Video Killed the Radio Star, which I was reading today, the first video ever played on MTV apparently.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I remember it. I really remember. This is a Japanese edition, 7-inch of slightly different cover, which is really nice. But yeah, I mean, I didn't make the connection then. To me, it was like, oh, it's that Buggles record. Like that I liked. In fact, my mum bought the single. It wasn't me that bought it. It was my mum. And I didn't have the album. Right. I just had, I heard the single and it was like, oh yeah, I really like that single. The Kid Dynamo on the B-side quite a bit as well. I didn't make the connection with Trevor Horn until kind of much later, really.
Yeah, I mean, I had no idea who he was at the time. I mean, the thing is, I was really into Jeff Downes. It's quite funny. I was so into the Buggles when I was at school that I changed my name to Jeff Downes for a while. And I used to write Jeff Downes in all my school books and insist that all my friends call me Jeff.
You don't do it now.
No, well, not that often. But there was something about that video. It was so distinctive. The music was so different. It seemed like it was a harbinger of a new kind of sound, a new kind of image. It seemed like
it was really punchy, wasn't it? Really punchy and slick. Yeah. And like I've read that he wanted to get the drummer to, because they're not computer drums, they're actual drums, but he wanted them to be very rigid and like a drum machine. Yeah. And it just sounded fantastic, and I've recently read, interestingly, Thomas Dolby's autobiography, and he talks about Video Killed the Radio Star because Bruce Woolley recorded, and I didn't even realize this until I'd read, Bruce Woolley recorded a version of Video Killed the Radio Star because obviously they worked on the track together, and I think they came out around the same time, but. As Thomas Dolby talks about in his book, like the Trevor Horn Buggles version just absolutely wiped the floor with their version because it was just so immaculately produced and had all the, the little hooks and the little tricks in there. Just made it like the huge kind of pop hit that it became. I think Bruce Woolley's he's gone back and done like a theremin version and things like that as well, hasn't he, recently? So I think it's fair enough. You can choose your favorite, but I mean. I think everybody will know Video Killed Radio Star by the Buggles. I don't think, they'll recognise or have even maybe heard of the Bruce Woolley version.
I was just doing some reading this morning, and I mean, I should say now, Trevor Horn comes from the northeast of England, I think, doesn't he? And just scuffled around for a long time. He I didn't know this. He played in the band that Tina Charles had. Fairly middle of the road, kind of lightweight pop star in the late 1970s. But that's where he met Jeff Downes and Bruce Woolley. And I think Anne Dudley as well from Art of Noise was maybe in her band too. So these things go kind of all the way back. But he was in that band. But he formed the Buggles apparently in 1977 with Jeff Downes and Bruce Woolley. And they did the demo of Clean Clean and Video Killed the Radio Star. And then Bruce Woolley left the band, and he didn't surface then for maybe 2 more years when this actually came out. And in the meantime, Trevor and Jeff Downes got together and did all sorts of stuff.
This is a thing called Chromium Star to Star, which has the track Caribbean Air Control on it as well. So they must have done sort of like released it under different names or something. But if you look at the team behind this album, it's like Jeff Downes, keyboards, Anne Dudley, Louis Jardim, who did like percussion and stuff as well with Trevor, and Hans Zimmer.
Right.
The guy who does all the Hollywood soundtracks and things, because I think Trevor Horn's done a few things with him as well. Well, yeah, this is very much a kind of early template for what they did with Buggles. I mean, it's not as good a album or as polished, but it's worth a listen, I think.
I was streaming that album today, and what really came across very, very clearly was that Trevor did have his own sound, kind of right back from the start, and it was a very disco-y sound. Wouldn't you agree? It's definitely got a kind of disco, it's like funky kind of sound to it, with a slightly futuristic kind of veneer. You know, these kind of keyboards, that all these big kind of chords, and this kind of, there's a definite melodic richness coming through, even though the tunes are a bit naff. The tunes are not, you know, top drawer. But Trevor seemed to have his own conception. I think him and Jeff Downes early on, they clearly had an idea in the back of their minds for this sound that was somehow going to be, you know, the sound of the future, just the sound of 80s pop, you know, taking that from the 1970s and just sort of tweaking it and evolving it.
I mean, he's talked about in the past of, you know, he used to play in a lot of clubs playing bass with the Tina Charles band, and he'd hear I Feel Love playing and think, my God, you know, this is the future of music, you know, and he loved Kraftwerk, and he always wanted to bring Kraftwerk into kind of the pop arena, which is kind of, you know, if you look at the production around the Buggles, it's that techno stuff, but it's kind of, he said Kraftwerk meets Vince Hill, so he wanted to almost do a kind of sort of like a lounge kind of version of Kraftwerk, which is interesting because that theme comes through quite a few albums, you know, in the future.
I think also, though, what they managed to do when they got the Buggles together, which was in 1979, was to reference lots of different things. So they brought, you know, as you say, that kind of disco futurist thing and the house music and Kraftwerk, but they somehow managed to blend it with things like 1970s yacht rock and soft rock, and also a little bit of prog rock. You can definitely hear.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I was playing the ABC album, Lexicon of Love last night. No, it was the Frankie album. It was Pleasure Dome. And there's a track on that. I think it's the Pleasure Dome track itself. It's got these guitar chords, which are straight out of Welcome to the Machine by Pink Floyd.
Oh, yeah.
Really
it's all
rich,
like beautiful acoustic kind of strums that kind of go in stereo. And, of course, Steve Howe from Yes played on
absolutely.
Well.
Well, I mean, we'll get to that. All this kind of yes, Buggles crossover. But it's quite interesting that Trevor always said he was a big fan of Yes, as in the early 1970s Yes, and he used to love to play all those great kind of, you know, over the top progressive albums. But you can definitely hear that. In this, you know, tracks such as, you know, the final song, Johnny on the Monorail. It's got Pink Floyd in it. It's got Supertramp in it.
Yeah. He was obsessed, I think, with J.G. Ballard as well, and I think the film or the book Crash, which was all about that, you know, literally mixing technology and metal with human stuff. And there's lots of stuff in there about robots and, you know, I Love You, Miss Robot, and, you know, there was lots of stuff that was going on at the time around the sort of 79, 80, 81. I mean, you know, we're fans of Jeff Lynne, aren't we? And there was lots of stuff on Time that's all about kind of, you know, robots and that sort of thing. So I think it was in the sort of, you know, the zeitgeist of the time. And it was kind of coming out of punk, because Trevor Horn, you know, hasn't been a fan of punk. He was... you know, because he loves production. So, you know, he talks about the fact that, you know, the new wave stuff was much more interesting to him than kind of, you know, thrashing guitars.
Yeah, there's this, there's a line on this album, isn't there? Then the shiny serving clones running with my telephones. And the album starts with these kind of samples of like telephone rings and kind of shouts. And you can hear the Art of Noise stuff kind of already there. It's like, clearly already he's got this vision, right? This is what pop music's going to be now. It's going to be this kind of futurist thing, but it's also going to be nostalgic sounding. I think that's the great genius of this record. You know, tracks like Elstree, which look back at kind of, you know, classic 1950s movies, and you just got that kind of atmosphere of wistful, nostalgic, looking back to it like a bygone age, but at the same time it's futuristic. Because you got
very much so, and it was on the cusp of like the biggest sort of technological change that I think the music industry's been through. You know, with the kind of arrival of samplers and that the whole digital revolution, which kind of, you know, Trevor Horn was right there. You know, with the kind of new technology coming along. You know, the Fairlight and sampling and you know, the digital recording, which is hugely important as it goes on. And so he was right there at the perfect time for that as well. So all that, I mean, you know, like on the second Buggles album, you know, the stuff where it's, you know, there's like Adventures in Modern Recording, which is basically a blueprint for kind of stuff that he does with like Frankie and like talking about, you know, but he's not playing, talking about the guy in the band not playing his instruments, and
he's just having adventures in modern recording.
It's kind of and you know, they used to talk about the fact they used to, you know, that it'd be wonderful to have a machine in a basement somewhere that was just churning out music, you know, from computers, and talk about this idea of technology. And so technology has very much been a part of his career.
It sounds almost like he's like the musical equivalent of Douglas Adams. I mean, that thought has just kind of occurred to me now. But, you know, I mean, you've got Douglas Adams in the late 70s, you know, basically predicting things like the internet and electronic books and everything. And you've got Trevor Horn coming up at about the same time in music. And he seems to sort of have a similar visionary quality. He's just clearly, he completely instinctively understood where things were going. And he was able to maneuver himself into a position where he was going to be really, you know, at the reins, really. But then if we pause for 1 minute, because I mean we'll get onto all those records in a minute, you know, like Frankie. But first we've got to go through this really strange career
lurch to the kind of left or right or whatever.
No, this I can remember so clearly, because I love the Buggles, and they were just straight up and straight down again. You know, they were here today, gone tomorrow. They were so short-lived, and I really wanted to know what had happened to them. And my dad came home from work one day, because my dad loved them as well. You know, we used to listen to them together. And he came home one day from work and said, "One of my work colleagues has told me that the Buggles have joined this band called Yes." And I haven't got a bloody clue Yes were, you know. But I mean, sure enough, I mean, it's so surreal, isn't it? Because you've got, I mean, there's Yes there. You've got Chris Squire, you've got Alan White, you've got who's this over here now? Steve Howe.
Steve Howe.
And then you've got Jeff Downes.
Yeah.
Trevor Horn from the Buggles. Now, this was because they shared a manager, apparently. Brian Lane was their manager, was a manager of the Buggles, and he was the manager of Yes. And John Anderson had left Yes during one of these endless kind of arguments that Yes were always having.
One occasion where.
And Trevor Horn and Jeff Downes were like, "Oh, we'll be in Yes. Yeah, I mean, you know, we can do that." It's bizarre, isn't it?
It is bizarre, yeah. And I think Trevor Horn as well just said it was a bit nuts. You know, like he, and also he said he remembers, like, I mean, he said you lose all your inhibitions and your nerves when you're going on in front of Madison Square Gardens in front of like 100,000 people.
50,000 of whom are shouting, "John Anderson, where's John Anderson?"
Yeah. He said in between the songs when it went quiet, people were like, "You suck," which mustn't have been, you know, very nice for him. But that's something that I like about Trevor Horn as well, is that he never stands still. He obviously gets bored really quickly. So whatever he does, he kind of goes, "Right, I've had enough of that now. I'm kind of bored of that." And just goes into doing something completely different, which just
moves on.
You know, how you go from him being in Yes to then suddenly producing Dollar, and then and just some of the moves he makes. He's obviously just doing stuff that takes his fancy, rather than going down, well, I'll go and produce these bands. You know, he's just going, well, I don't want to do that. I want to just kind of do my own thing, which I think is quite brave, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think he did have a slightly unpleasant experience with the Yes thing. I've got a memory of a story where he was being driven to the studio or to a live gig or something, and he was trying to scribble the lyrics to a song because they were desperately trying to get the album finished, and he had no words, and
Yeah.
he was just frantically writing. But on that record, you've got the song on the Yes album. You've got the song "Into the Lens," which
Yeah.
which then turned up on this record
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. As
as
I Am a Camera, isn't
I
it?
Am a Camera, and it's really
Yeah, that's
interesting
right.
to compare the two different versions, because the Yes version is full of all the kind of twiddly diddly Steve Howe
Yeah,
Yes
licks and yeah.
licks, and lots of playing, lots of musicianship.
Yeah.
On the but on this version, it's so beautifully minimal. It's like so superbly just sort of crafted, like a kind of just like a quartz watch,
Yeah.
isn't it? There's not one like iota of fat on it. It's so elegantly done, just with those beautiful kind of keyboards, and everything about it is just Trevor Horn. And so you
Yeah.
could sort of see that the Yes thing was never really going to work.
No.
He sort of did his best in Yes, him and Jeff Downes, but clearly he was not going to be there for long. But what's interesting is that Chris Squire and I think it was Steve Howe, the reason they got them into the band was that they heard The Age of Plastic. So that's quite interesting. The fact that they heard The Age of Plastic and went, oh yeah, we could definitely make use of these two guys. So they did recognize something in them, some
Yeah.
element. And I think that goes back maybe to what I was saying before, that Trevor and Jeff came from this very musical background. I mean, Jeff Downes, we should say as well. I mean, Jeff Downes, this immensely kind of gifted, trained classical pianist, beautiful music.
Not you. Not this is the actual Jeff Downes.
No, yeah. Jeff Downes actually in reality, not me. Yeah.
So I'm getting confused now if it's you or
yeah.
Jeff Downes.
It did used to happen a lot back in the day. Yeah.
But yeah, I think what when you define Trevor Horn, I always think of him as he takes you on a journey, and not just like, because obviously sonically takes you on these amazing kind of journeys, but also I think kind of in like in the Buggles stuff, like very lyrically takes you on the kind of stories and these journeys, and that's very much a kind of prog kind of thing to do, but he kind of does it in a pop kind of context, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I always thought that about this album, about The Age of Plastic. I used to listen to it, and it was almost like watching a movie. The way it kind of starts with The Age of Plastic, which seems to be a kind of opening scene in some kind of dystopian, nightmarish, futuristic story, and it ends with Johnny on the monorail, which builds to this really amazing kind of atmospheric sci-fi kind of climax. And then it ends.
It definitely puts pictures in your head, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. With the dog barking, as the fade happens, right at the end, you get this dog barking in this alleyway, and then you get this final boom, this just incredible piano chord, which you sort of think, Day in the Life, Beatles. I mean, it's shot through with so many reference points. And I think that's why it was so big in a way, that it kind of appealed to the older generation, people who'd grown up on the Yes and the Beatles and the Floyd, but it was also going to appeal to the kids who were coming up and were about to start getting into things like Erasure and the Pet Shop Boys and, all these.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the Buggles predated all those two.
Yeah, the pop duo. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, if you look at like you say, Erasure, Pet Shop Boys, Blancmange, whatever, all those kind of 80s kind of duos. Yeah, very much so.
So if we just move on then. So I'm looking now at my little thing here, 1982, we've got Dollar. No, I don't have any Dollar records. Not from want of trying. I mean, I do I do look out for them, but so what can you tell us about?
I used to be a bit like, oh God, I've got to go, like when I started collecting Trevor Horn stuff, like, oh God, I've got to go and buy some Dollar. But actually because they re-released like the Dollar kind of album around that time, and some of the tracks are absolutely fantastic, that he's produced, like Videotech and Handheld in Black and White, and again the kind of they're kind of like Buggles songs with kind of the David Van Day and Teresa Bizarre over the top of them, really. I mean, in fact, I think Videotech is an outtake on it is an outtake on this, so they're very much kind of.
Sorry, I was going to say that his wife at the time, Jill Sinclair, who was also his manager, apparently she'd said to him after they did this record, she kind of said to him, look, you're clearly a great producer, but you're not really a great singer. And so he kind of thought, well, let's stop trying to be a pop star then. Let's actually now just, go into production. And that's where we now kind of launch into this story now, where we get into the Dollar and we get into the ABC and we get into the, Frankie. So it's a big major turning point for him, isn't it? And Dollar, I guess, sort of is the start of that journey where he starts.
Yeah, very much so. No, it's Give Me Back My Heart, where it's got the sort of la's, the la, 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 la. And it's basically Teresa out of the band. They've sampled her into a Fairlight. And it's the first time I think it was used in a kind of top 10 hit. And it was like kind of a major moment. And also Dollar and the kind of pristine production of that is how he got the gig for ABC as well, because I think ABC had already had Tears Are Not Enough produced by another producer, and then Trevor Horn came in to kind of reproduce it, if you like, remix it, and then they did the whole album together.
I was playing this album today, and I mean, it's a great piece of work, but there was something I was noticing as I was listening to it. It was a weird thing, because it's got really great lyrics, really kind of like little spiteful sort of stories, really great little kind of like embittered tirades, I guess, really great little rhyming couplets. However, I kept being distracted by the music, because I kept trying to pay attention to Martin Fry's words, but I kept having to go back and listen again, because I'd been so distracted by all this beautiful sort of Fairlight stuff. It's almost like literally bells and whistles. I mean, can you, because you'll know more about this, can you quickly and succinctly characterize for us what does the Fairlight, not mechanically, what does the Fairlight do, but what is it about the Fairlight that makes that sound? Is this kind of spangly, twinkly? It makes you feel like you're sort of rushing through the night sky with this incredible firework display all around you, and there's like just little curlicues of light and just little flashes of color. What's it doing? I mean, how did he get that sound? What's the trick to it?
Well, it's a lot of expensive equipment basically, but
right.
I mean, the Fairlight was I mean, it was quite a kind of low resolution sampler. The actual quality of it wasn't very good, and they couldn't sample for very long. But what it could do is it did gimmicks really well, and that's what kind of Trevor Horn loved. Like there was at one point, I think JJ Jexalic, who he got in to kind of program the Fairlight and get to use it. He basically sampled a tennis match into the Fairlight with like the sound of the ball going back and forth and being hit and quiet please and all that kind of stuff, and so that they used that in the ABC and in quite a few other things, and it just allows you to kind of get these mad kind of noises and play them very high up in the register, very quietly sometimes on the sort of edges of the sort of sonic landscape that you're painting, just to kind of give little bits of interest here and there. And Trevor Horn is absolute genius at putting these little kind of, like he calls them, whiz bangs and gags, these little kind of oral treats that just kind of scattered throughout his productions that just kind of keep you coming back, really, I suppose.
Well, I guess that's the kind of winning combination, isn't it? You've got this piece of technology, which, as you say, is just kind of able to produce these kind of new sounds and these new effects that nobody's really heard before. But then you've got Trevor Horn, who's got this very musicianly kind of, background, and he's actually able to kind of orchestrate that and turn it into something meaningful. And turn it into something almost on a parallel with the kind of great 1970s kind of rock albums, where you had these guitars and these instruments that had been arranged in these amazing ways. Now you've got Trevor Horn, and he's arranging these totally new sounds, and he's doing it with as much artistry as people like, say Jeff Lynne, Out of the Blue, 1977. And now you've got Trevor Horn doing it in whatever it is, 1983. It's the same kind of idea, isn't it? It's like, this is the palette of stuff we've got to play with, and I'm now going to do this incredible thing with it and turn it into something quite sort of, majestic.
And I think with what he was trying to do as well with ABC was do a very kind of pristine sound. And again, he kind of used an 808 drum machine and I think it was a Lin. That was 828 and a Lin and stuff. And he had a little kind of rig where he would literally program all the drums right from start to finish. Because they recorded, I think, the early stuff with ABC with the drummer. He was an excellent drummer, actually. But he just said, I think we can make this better if we use drum machines. So they used kind of the drum machines to keep everything really tight and kind of punchy. And, you know, he basically was happy to discard musicians if he could get a better result with machines. And that's not to say that machines completely replaced humans in the you know, the machines came up with the drums, or they came up with the bass or whatever. But if he could do a better job with a drum machine or a bass from the Fairlight, he would use it. It was all about, for him, the finished article and getting the best sound possible.
I guess that's quite a nice lead into this record. This is Welcome to the Pleasure Dome by Frankie, which I think came out in 82?
84.
Sorry, 84. Yeah. Now, I mean, you'll know more about the history than me, but my kind of understanding of this is that this was a band that he kind of discovered or nurtured or whatever. But when they got into the studio, he just basically decided, look, I'll just make the record. We'll get Holly Johnson to sing on it. We'll put your name on it. And that's the way it was going to be.
I think that's doing the band a bit of a disservice, because they, you know, they were a decent, they were, you know, a good band, and they came up with some, you know, the bass line of Two Tribes is, you know, is Mark O'Toole and people, you know, and you know, they've definitely they contributed to it. But I think in the early days, Trevor Horn really struggled on the first, on Relax, to kind of get the sound that he wanted, because he got the band to come in and play Relax, and it didn't work. He didn't sound like, he just sounded like a band playing, you know, an ordinary kind of band, really. You know, Holly's vocals were fantastic, but he just didn't work. So he threw all that out, and then he got in the band from Ian Jury's band, the Blockheads, and got them to come in, and they were brilliant, you know, really sharp and absolutely nailed it completely, but they sounded like the Blockheads. So again, he didn't, you know, he wasn't happy with that, so he threw that out. And then with Steve Lipson, who is his engineer at the time, a genius engineer, absolutely brilliant, obviously went on to have a fantastic producing career as well, came up with some stuff, you know, so with drum loops and working on kind of coming up with a beat using like a, you know, drum sample and a bass, a low E note, dum 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 dum, just coming up with that. And he just thought, yeah, that's it, we kind of nailed it. And he worked on it for one night. He used to work through the night, and the story is that they got Holly back from, he'd just been out clubbing all night, and got him back to come about 4 in the morning, 3-4 in the morning, and sing, or come and at least listen to what they worked on with Relax. And him and Paul Rutherford started dancing around in the studio, and he was like, right, you know, I think we've got something here. And and that's where it came from. But it took like months and months of time to kind of get to the point where, you know, Relax sounded like he wanted it to sound like. And if I listened to it again today, Relax, and it just sounds so huge. It's just a massive sounding record. Like there's a horn at the beginning of it, and he said it's almost like he wanted it to be a call to sex, like a kind of summoning of sex. And it's an absolute filthy record, which was eventually, I think, picked up by Radio 1. But it's got so much energy and kind of rawness. It just blows everything else out of the water from around that time. It's just such a heavy, you know, magical kind of sound. It's just out of this world.
Well, that's why I was going to mention to you this idea that I think I was reading today somewhere that Trevor Horn, you know, he got dubbed, or he got kind of labelled as the man who invented the 80s, you know, in terms of pop music. I mean, would you say that's an accurate depiction? Because it must have been very difficult for all the people around, you know, at that time. Anybody trying to make pop records, or, you know, trying to get into the charts, or trying to do something interesting with a synthesizer or anything. You think, bloody hell, we've got this guy now who's just making the greatest. I guess it's a bit like if you go back to the 60s when you have people like Phil Spector making these amazing records,
yeah,
fairly similar kind of thing. Like, oh my God, we've got this guy, this absolute wonder kid who's just making these records that nobody else can approach anything like them. You know, must have been very intimidating for everybody.
It's funny, you know, like because I'm a massive fan of like Martin Hannett and Joy Division and you know all the work he did on that, and I didn't realize until quite recently I read about Martin Hannett, where apparently it was very, you know, was really saw Trevor Horn as his like, you know, kind of rival. It's like, you know, who's this guy, Trevor Horn? I've got to beat Trevor Horn. Right. And was always asking Factory to buy him a studio so that he could compete with Trevor Horn. Because he always had to use like Strawberry Studios, but it was, you know, one that they hired out of, you know, when they did all the kind of Joy Division and New Order stuff and things. But he wanted his own studio to compete with Trevor Horn. And yeah, I think there was, you know, a lot of rivalry, but for a time I think there was no one else that could kind of touch the kind of stuff that he was doing.
He was
kind of
certainly like, yeah, I mean, it was certainly all over the radio, wasn't it? I mean, it was very, I mean, you know, Frankie in particular, I think, I mean, you know, I don't know how many people knew Trevor Horn's name, but certainly everybody. And interestingly, you know, you were saying earlier about how you hadn't connected him back to the Buggles. You know, I mean, millions of people would have heard those Frankie records, and how many of them would have realized that it was the guy who'd done Video Killed the Radio Star? Probably a vanishingly small number of people actually realized it.
You know, this is it. You know, like, I mean, this for me is the, you know, this is the touchstone record, because I didn't really, I didn't hear Relax when it first came out because it was banned. I didn't hear it on the radio. I didn't buy it. I was like, what is this weird record with this kind of disturbing cover on them, you know, of these two people, you know, looks like doing some rumpy pumpy on the front of it. But the two tribes, I remember the Tube had a late night showing of the video of Two Tribes. It was like one of these big reveals of the video, and it was like a, you know, a big 10-minute video, and it's done by Godley and Cream was the video, and it was this actually. It was the one of I think it's Chinyenko and Reagan, basically scrapping in a kind of ring with everyone, you know, with everyone kind of jeering them on and getting them to fight. They're basically, you know, just fighting each other, and then the world explodes at the end. I heard that Two Tribes, and I just thought it was incredible, and I just blew my mind because it was the 12-inch mix that they did on the Tube. So immediately when it came out, I just went out. Well, I remember when I went out with all my friends, and we all bought copies of this. I got this. My friend Paul got Carnage, the other 12-inch. You know, we all got singles, picture discs, like the whole bloody lot. And this Annihilation mix, I mean, it starts with like an air raid siren, and then it goes into the track, and it's got samples. Well, it's not samples actually; it's re-recordings of the kind of, you know, if a member of your family dies whilst in the shelter, put them outside, and it's kind of, you know, it's very apocalyptic. And I used to kind of look at the back, and there's all these kind of facts and figures about, you know, how many weapons the US has, and the Russia, and anyway, it kind of just. It fed into that 80s. Anybody who's my age, you know, who grew up in the 80s will know all about the kind of nuclear war fear that was around at the time. It really was. You know, it wasn't like, is nuclear war going to happen? It was like, when? So I used to, you know, again, this is the back of the Carnage cover, and there's like sort of charts on it where it says, you know, like the blast will last a day, thermal radiation lasts a week, and then fallout, food shortages from 3 months to a year ongoing, contagious diseases, and you used to go on to the like, and I used to like pour over it, and go, oh God Almighty.
I think casual listeners probably, you know, from back in the day, probably think of Frankie, and they think of something which is very, you know, whiz bang, pop music, you know, daytime radio, whatever. Even though it was banned on daytime radio, but you know. You know, sort of think of Frankie as being, you know, a group that's got a kind of a dark undertow to it, or something which is it's got this, you know, dystopian thing. And in that sense, I guess it's classic sort of post-punk, isn't it? Really, I mean, it's not post-punk music, but it's music that came out after punk, and it has those sort of just really interesting dark elements that kind of draw you in, and it turns out to be something much more interesting than maybe you thought it was when you heard it on the radio. So you kind of hear this kind of sound on the radio, which is just really attractive and pretty, and kind of, oh, that sounds great. And then you actually get into it and you think, wow, this has got some depth to it.
I do think this is one of the great 12 inches. So for me, it's up there with like Blue Monday. It was the sound of it. It just sounded so amazing. And then obviously from the 12 inches and all that, you know, the hype, the awaiting of the album was just like, you know, it was at kind of fever pitch, really. It was like, oh, you know, what's it going to be like? Like everything comes back to that moment when I heard Welcome to the Pleasure Dome. It's like I was sat under my dad's speakers, you know, well, it was actually with these big kind of early 80s headphones on, listening to Welcome to the Pleasure Dome, just having my mind blown, just like how amazing it sounded. And I don't think I've ever heard anything as good, and I've always been trying to find something as good as that, and I've never been able to do it. And then, you know, so this is the latest one I got like a box set that was released sort of 2014, which has like, you know, every single not every single outtake, but many outtakes of stuff, and it's signed by Trevor Horn and everything. But it really is for me, it's like the defining album of my kind of growing up.
Okay, well, I'm starting to think we should maybe end this installment here, and because we've still got quite a lot of stuff to talk about. So why don't we call this the end of part 1, and then we'll come back. And I don't think we can come all the way up to date, but there's certainly, I'm looking at my list here, there's at least another 6 records on my list here that we can talk about.
Yeah, sure.
So let's bring this one to a close, and then we'll reconvene and tell some more interesting stories about Trevor, and then we'll get to you meeting him and interviewing him and all that good stuff. Okay, folks, so I hope you enjoyed that part 1, as it's turned out to be, and we'll come back and make part 2 as soon as humanly possible. So from me, Jeff, and from Jamie, we'll see you soon. Take care.
Cheers.
Bye.